December 14, 1939. Somewhere off the freezing coast of Poland, a German U-boat rises through the black waves. Inside, an officer's gloved hand flicks a switch, and a soft hum fills the cramped compartment. The smell of oil and metal lingers thick in the air. At the navigation desk sits a small box, dull gray, covered in keys and wires. The officer, Captain Lieutenant Franz Meller, leans over it with reverence. The Enigma machine. He turns its rotors carefully, aligning each one to the day's codebook setting, EXF. Then he presses a key, A, and a tiny light flickers. Another press, N. Then Q. No two letters are ever the same twice. To the Germans, this was perfection. A cipher system that even the most brilliant enemy mind could never hope to unravel. Messages flickered across the Atlantic that night. Coordinates, convoy routes, weather codes. Each one scrambled into a storm of gibberish before bouncing through the ether. On the surface, the U-boat's antenna glinted briefly in the moonlight. Then it vanished again beneath the waves. In Berlin, the mathematicians of the Wehrmacht boasted that even if the British captured one of these devices, they'd still never know how it worked. 26 letters, 3 rotors, said one officer proudly. That's 150 million combinations. They believed it was impenetrable, the backbone of their empire at war. But far to the west, in a quiet English countryside mansion known only as Bletchley Park, the first sparks of resistance were flickering. A new kind of battle was about to begin, not of tanks and planes, but of logic and language. Rain drummed on the windows of the wooden huts as a thin young man with messy brown hair and a distracted look walked briskly between them, clutching a folder under his arm. His name was Alan Turing. He was late, as usual. Inside, a handful of analysts hunched over intercepts, endless sheets of letters, meaningless, taunting. Still nothing, muttered one of the codebreakers. Every time we think we've got it, they change the damn settings again. Turing set the folder down gently and looked up at the wall, where yesterday's failed attempts were pinned like a gallery of defeat. But he didn't look frustrated. He looked intrigued. What if, he said softly, the machine isn't the problem? What if it's the people using it? The room fell silent. That moment, quiet, almost forgettable, marked the beginning of one of the most secret and consequential struggles in modern history. The Battle of the Atlantic would soon depend on these cryptic letters, and Turing's obsession with understanding them would become an invisible weapon more powerful than any bomb. Outside, the war thundered on. Convoys burned in the Atlantic, German bombers roared over London. But here, in this quiet country estate, another kind of war had begun. One fought with pencils, probability, and machines no one had ever seen before. And somewhere deep below the icy waters of the North Atlantic, as U-boat commanders sent their encoded triumphs back to Berlin, none of them knew that their secret messages had just met their greatest enemy, a mathematician who didn't believe in the impossible. January 1940. The wind howled outside the cold corridors of Bletchley Park as Alan Turing leaned over his cluttered desk. Cigarette smoke curled above pages of equations, rotors, and notes scrawled in hurried pencil. Coffee rings stained the edges of his blueprints, the fingerprints of obsession. Across the room, cryptanalyst Gordon Welchman watched as Turing rearranged a small set of wooden drums and wires on the table. "You really think this can think faster than we can?" he asked skeptically. Turing didn't look up. "Not think," he murmured. "Just try faster." This was the birth of the bomb. A massive electromechanical brain designed not to outwit Enigma, but to exhaust its secrets. The German machine used 3 rotating wheels that changed with every keystroke, but the British plan was simple: build a machine that could test every possibility faster than any human ever could. The idea was radical, bordering on madness. Turing's colleagues were mathematicians, linguists, classicists, not engineers. Yet night after night, the whir of motors and the click of switches echoed through the mansion's wooden halls. Each failure only fueled the urgency. Every day they failed meant another convoy sunk, another ship gone beneath the waves. In the radio intercept huts nearby, young women from the Women's Royal Naval Service, the Wrens, typed frantically as coded German messages poured in from listening stations along the coast. They didn't know what the messages meant. They just recorded them, copied them, and sent them into Hut 8, Turing's domain. One night, just after midnight, a Wren named Joan Clark, one of the few women mathematicians on site, burst through the door with a fresh intercept. "Kriegsmarine," she said breathlessly. "Naval traffic, new Enigma settings." Turing took the paper and studied the endless line of letters. FAQ X bis LP. He smiled faintly. "They've changed their daily keys again." Then it's hopeless, Clark said, sitting down wearily. No, he replied quietly, it's just one step closer. Weeks passed. The first bomb prototype, a towering frame of wires and spinning drums, was finally delivered and installed. The moment the switch was flipped, the room filled with a mechanical heartbeat, hundreds of rotors whirring in unison, clacking, spinning, testing. To outsiders it looked like chaos. But to Turing, it was music, the sound of reason wrestling chaos into order. Each click brought him closer to a pattern, a sliver of meaning hidden in the noise. One morning an operator shouted, "Stop! We've got to stop!" The machine had reached a potential solution. Everyone froze. Turing rushed forward, scanning the printout. A series of letters that, for the first time, weren't random. They formed a recognizable word. Wetterbericht. Weather report. The first confirmed German message decrypted by Bletchley Park. For a brief moment, the entire hut erupted. Exhaustion turned to exhilaration. But Turing didn't celebrate. He stood silently, eyes distant, already thinking about what came next. He knew this wasn't victory. Not yet. Enigma's settings changed daily, and the Germans were about to add a fourth rotor to their naval version, a change that would make the puzzle exponentially harder. The real challenge was still to come. And Turing understood something that few others did, that this wasn't just about solving codes. It was about saving lives, day after day, with every intercept cracked and every convoy spared from the wolves beneath the Atlantic. As dawn broke over Bletchley, the hum of the bomb machine continued, its rotors spinning endlessly, mechanical prayer wheels in the war of logic versus tyranny. And at its center stood a quiet man with uncombed hair and tired eyes, whose inventions would one day become the foundation of something no one yet understood, the age of computers. But for now, his creation had one purpose only, to make the unbreakable bleed secrets. March 1941. North Atlantic. The sea was black as ink, broken only by the faint silhouettes of Allied cargo ships crawling through the waves. Beneath them, in the freezing depths, German U-boats stalked their prey. The hunters of Admiral Karl Donitz's wolf packs had a single, deadly advantage: coordination. Every movement, every ambush, every torpedo fired came from coded orders sent through Enigma. On board U-110, Captain Lieutenant Fritz Julius Lemp adjusted his periscope. Through the lenses, he saw another ship bursting into flames. A freighter struck amidships. He smiled grimly. "Message to BDU command," he said. "Convoy destroyed. Continuing pursuit." Below deck, his radio operator began tapping the encrypted transmission, the familiar clack of keys and the flicker of bulbs on the Enigma. Within minutes, Berlin would receive the report, encoded, invisible, unstoppable. But the ocean had plans of its own. Hours later, the hunter became the hunted. Depth charges from HMS Bulldog rocked U-110 from stern to bow. The submarine shuddered violently, water pouring in. "Abandoned ship!" Lemp shouted. In the chaos, the crew scrambled for the surface, leaving behind something far more valuable than they realized. As the U-boat crew floated in the freezing water, British sailors boarded the wreck before it sank completely. Inside the control room, drenched in seawater, lay an object none of them immediately recognized. A compact gray machine with letters and rotors, half submerged. Beside it, codebooks sealed in watertight containers. "Sir," shouted Lieutenant David Baum, "we found something strange." That something was an intact Enigma machine, one of the few ever captured from a German U-boat. The moment it was delivered to Bletchley Park, Alan Turing's team realized what it meant: a direct look into the enemy's brain. The physical machine allowed them to test theories, confirm wiring patterns, and, for the first time, verify their bomb's logic. But it was the codebooks that changed everything. They contained daily key settings, rotor orders, and plugboard configurations, the vital, skeleton keys of the Enigma system. For a few short weeks, Bletchley Park could read German naval messages almost in real time. As the intercepts rolled in, the reality became horrifyingly clear. The Germans were winning the Atlantic War. Hundreds of ships had been sunk, Britain's supply lines were bleeding dry. But now, for the first time, the Allies could see the wolf packs move, every ambush, every rendezvous, every whispered order from Donitz's headquarters in Loya. Turing's decoding team began working around the clock. Each message decrypted meant a convoy saved. Message received, Clark would murmur, reading aloud. E-96 ordered northeast of Rockall. Target, convoy HX-229. Alert the Admiralty, Turing said. Reroute immediately. The invisible war of mathematics was now saving lives in the tangible one. Ships changed course in the night without knowing why, and passed through waters that would otherwise have been their graves. But the Germans weren't fools. When U-boat after U-boat failed to find its targets, suspicions arose. "They are avoiding us too precisely," one commander warned. "Something is wrong." By early 1942, the German Navy introduced the four-rotor Enigma, a modification that shattered Bletchley's progress overnight. The messages became unreadable once again. The mood at Bletchley turned grim. Turing stood before the motionless bomb, its once musical hum now silent. "It's as if," he said softly, "the war has started over again." For months, they were blind. Convoys vanished. U-boats struck with renewed confidence. The Allies were losing, and no one knew why, except a small group of mathematicians in an English mansion, racing against time to reclaim the enemy's language. And deep beneath the Atlantic, in the steel silence of another submarine, a German officer smiled as he sent a message home. He had no idea that his machine, the very one he trusted to keep his secrets, would soon betray him again. August 1942. Bletchley Park was suffocating in silence. The corridors once alive with the rhythmic clatter of bomb machines now felt haunted. Messages arrived from the intercept stations every hour, endless lines of German text, meaningless without the lost keys. In the huts, tired eyes stared at typewriters, pencils rolled idly between fingers, and the air smelled of stale tea and exhaustion. Alan Turing sat at his desk, motionless. Before him lay the remains of an intercepted message from the German Navy. The four-rotor Enigma had transformed the code from an intricate riddle into a mathematical fortress. Even Turing's fastest bomb could no longer keep pace. He rubbed his temples and whispered, almost to himself, "There's always a pattern, there has to be." It was then that a quiet voice interrupted his thoughts. "You said once," Joan Clark reminded him, standing by the doorway, "that the Germans make mistakes." He looked up. "Just human error." "Then maybe the machines haven't changed the war, the people still have." Her words lit something inside him. Turing pushed aside his notes and began writing furiously, chalk squeaking against the blackboard. "They still use weather reports, greetings, repetitions, Heil Hitler, standard phrases," he muttered. "That's it. Predictable words mean predictable settings." Over the following weeks, Hut 8 became a furnace of relentless activity. New logic tables were drawn up. Engineers modified the bombs to handle the fourth rotor, redesigning the wiring by hand. Sparks flew, oil smoked, and the machines grew faster, more alive, with every day. To the casual eye, Bletchley Park was chaos. But within that chaos, a new order was forming. The Wrens worked in 12-hour shifts, feeding the bombs with strings of letters. When one machine finished, another began. The sound was deafening, thousands of clicks, like mechanical rain. And then, late one night, it happened again. Operator Mavis Beatty, half asleep at her station, noticed a repeated phrase in an intercepted message. "Wettervorschau again," she muttered, weather forecast. It was one of the predictable openings Turing had flagged. She marked it and ran to Turing's office. He was already there, pacing, his tea gone cold. "If this is correct," he said, "it narrows the possibilities by thousands." They loaded the sequence into the modified bomb. The machine began to whir, faster and louder than before. Rotors spun, clacked, and locked in rhythmic bursts. Then suddenly, silence. A bell rang. The operator froze. "Stop. Possible match." Turing leaned over the printout. For several seconds, no one breathed. Then his face broke into the faintest of smiles. "Coordinates," he whispered. "Naval convoy orders." The four-rotor Enigma had been breached. Within hours, the decrypted messages reached Allied command. Submarines were repositioned, convoys rerouted, ambushes avoided. German wolf packs found themselves chasing ghosts across the Atlantic. In a single week, U-boat losses skyrocketed. The hunter had become the hunted. At Lorya, Admiral Donitz slammed his fist onto the table. "How can this be? They know our movements before we make them." His officers exchanged uneasy glances. Someone muttered, "Maybe there's a traitor." But there wasn't. Their traitor was mechanical, the very device they trusted beyond all others. Back in Bletchley, the celebrations were muted. There were no parades, no medals, no announcements. The men and women in the huts simply returned to their desks, poured another cup of tea, and continued listening to the enemy whisper secrets through the static. In less than 2 years, the balance of the Atlantic War had shifted completely. The convoys began arriving safely. Supplies flooded into Britain. The tide, once black with oil and fire, began to turn. And at the center of it all was a quiet mathematician who, against all logic, had made the impossible possible. Spring, 1943. The grounds of Bletchley Park were alive with the hum of controlled chaos. Wrens hurried between huts with armfuls of intercepted messages. Officers barked orders over telephones. The scent of wet grass mixed with the metallic tang of machinery. The war outside raged on, but here, the real victories were written in code and silence. Alan Turing stood in front of a large map of the North Atlantic pinned to the wall. Colored pins marked convoys and U-boat packs. Each new decrypted message shifted the board, a living, breathing reflection of the war's invisible front. Convoy HX-237 reroute confirmed, announced Joan Clark. They'll avoid the contact line entirely. Turing nodded, expression unreadable. The satisfaction of success was tempered by the knowledge that every correct decision saved lives, and every delay cost them. Behind every line of decrypted text was a ship, a crew, a hope of survival. Still, the strain was beginning to show. The mathematicians and analysts were ghosts of themselves, pale from long nights and endless cigarettes. The sound of the bombs never stopped. Even when they left the huts, their minds kept spinning like the rotors inside those machines. Turing rarely spoke of emotion, but one night as rain lashed against the hut's windows, he turned to Joan and asked quietly, "Do you ever think about what happens after?" "After the war?" she replied. He nodded. "If anyone will ever know what we did here." She hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Maybe it's better they don't. We only won because they never saw us coming." Outside, the war had begun to tilt decisively. Convoy losses dropped sharply. The Allied navies now hunted U-boats with precision guided by decrypted intelligence, Ultra, as the operation was now called. It was the most closely guarded secret in the entire Allied command, known only to a handful of leaders, including Churchill himself. "Give them everything they ask for," Churchill had said after visiting Bletchley. "They are shortening the war by years." Yet, despite their success, Turing's team lived in total secrecy. No one outside knew who they were or what they had achieved. Their letters were censored, their friendships confined to the shadowed grounds of the mansion. They fought a war that would never earn them medals, only exhaustion and silence. One morning, a runner burst into Hut 8, breathless. "Intercept from Loya. Immediate priority." Turing took the sheet, scanned it, and froze. It was a directive from Donitz himself, desperate orders to reposition surviving U-boats. The message confirmed what they had long suspected: the Germans were losing the Atlantic. Weeks later, British destroyers hunted and destroyed more U-boats than ever before. The ocean that had once belonged to the Reich now belonged to the Allies. Supplies flowed to Britain and the invasion of Europe became possible. The war's gears had shifted, all because of a machine that had betrayed its own creators. Yet, even as victory drew closer, there was no celebration in Bletchley. Turing's once restless energy had turned inward. He spoke little, sometimes wandering the grounds at night, his mind still caught in the web of ciphers. One evening, as he locked up his hut, he turned back toward the rows of bombs humming in the dark. "They think in patterns," he whispered to himself. "But so do we." He paused, listening to the rhythmic clicking fade into the distance. "Perhaps," he added softly, "that's what makes us human." He didn't know it yet, but the ideas born in these wooden huts, the logic, the automation, the algorithms, would outlive the war, transforming into the foundation of something entirely new. The machines that had broken Enigma would evolve into something far greater, the birth of modern computing. For now, though, they remained secrets, just like the people who built them. May 1945. The war in Europe was ending. In Berlin, buildings smoldered under a gray sky as the last echoes of artillery fire faded. In the wreckage of what was once the German High Command, a young signals officer sat at a desk surrounded by scattered documents and shattered equipment. In his trembling hands lay an Enigma machine, dented, scorched, still glinting faintly in the dust. He pressed a key one last time. A small light flickered weakly, then died. The machine was silent. The unbreakable code had finally broken itself, not through failure, but through defeat. Word spread quickly through Allied channels. Germany had surrendered. In Bletchley Park, there were no cheers, no champagne, only a strange stillness. After 6 years of war fought in absolute secrecy, the staff of the park began to leave their posts one by one. Messages stopped arriving. the bombs powered down, their spinning rotors grinding to a final halt. Alan Turing stood in Hut 8, surrounded by the ghosts of his own creation, machines that had saved millions, yet would never be known for it. The cables lay in neat coils. The chalkboard, once dense with equations, was now wiped clean. A world built on secrecy was vanishing in front of him. Joan Clark approached quietly, holding a folder marked Top Secret, to be destroyed. Inside were intercepted messages, decoding notes, diagrams, every trace of the war they had fought from behind locked doors. "Orders from command," she said softly. "Everything must go." Turing took the folder, hesitated, then nodded. Together they fed the papers into the furnace. Flames licked the edges of history, curling the pages into ash. As the last sheet turned to smoke, Turing whispered, "So this is how it ends," in silence. Outside, the first rays of summer sunlight glimmered over the lawn. The war that had defined their lives was over, yet their triumph would remain hidden for decades. Not even their families would know what they had done. Elsewhere, in London, Winston Churchill wrote a private note to his chiefs of staff. "Let it never be said that their work was ordinary. The geese that laid the golden eggs and never cackled." The Enigma story, the great invisible duel between code and countercode, would remain buried beneath official secrecy until long after the Cold War began. Alan Turing himself would move on to new ideas. Machines that could think, patterns that could learn. But in the years that followed, his brilliance would be met not with medals, but misunderstanding. His service remained classified, and the world forgot the man who had outsmarted the impossible. Yet even in anonymity, his legacy endured. The logic that cracked Enigma became the foundation for the first computers. The abstract mathematics born in Hut 8 would later power the satellites, the networks, and the digital world that would define the next century. The war of Enigma had ended, but its echoes still hum through every circuit on Earth. And somewhere, perhaps, Turing would have smiled, knowing that the machine that once betrayed its masters had, in the end, helped humankind understand the most profound code of all, the code of intelligence itself.